Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Erica Francis. I'm the Administrative Director for the CTSI. So I'm just going to take a second to introduce our speakers for today. So we have Abbey Fisher. Abbey received her Master's of Public Administration at Penn State Harrisburg, and she joined the College of Medicine in 2015 as a human research technologist. She served as a project manager on several research projects, including a large multi-site patient-centered outcomes research institute, otherwise known as PCORI, funded study, and two Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, grants. Since 2019, she has also supported the Department of Medicine's Vice Chair for Clinical Research, developing reporting dashboards, coordinating research faculty advisory committee activities, and spearheading the department's research staff recognition program. During the early stages of the COVID pandemic, Abbey created an information clearinghouse for Department of Medicine research staff and assisted with navigating frequently changing regulations and guidance. Abbey joined the Project ECHO team in 2020, where she currently serves as a senior project manager and leads the team's strategic planning process. And we have Sarah Cichy. Sarah has worked in operational and research roles across healthcare, education, and consulting for 16 years. She has helped teams secure funding, launch departmental and institutional initiatives, develop new programs, and commercialize pharmaceutical products. Sarah joined the College of Medicine in 2019 and Project ECHO in 2021, where she serves as sustainability manager and leads the program and funding strategic planning group. Welcome to you both. We are so excited to hear you both talk about strategic planning for every team. So with that, I am thrilled to turn it over to two of my favorite previous colleagues, Abbey and Sarah.
The feeling is mutual. Thank you so much, Erica. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started and ask Sarah to kind of advance. So I really want to start by thanking Erica, Emily Kissinger, Jen Krasniewski, and the entire CTSI team for hosting us. I'd also like to thank the entire ECHO team, and several of them are joining today. So please, if we missed anything, ECHO team, please let us know during the course of the presentation. And I really want to thank them for building a successful strategic planning process that we're able to share with you, and especially to Erica, who really empowered me to take a leadership role in our strategic planning process, as well as my colleague Sarah, who joined our team last year and has really elevated all of our work, including our strategic planning, and who designed this beautiful presentation. And she's just such a superstar. So I'm thrilled to work with her. Just to note that we have no financial conflicts to disclose. And so I will briefly go over our agenda. So some of you may have heard about strategic planning or tried it yourselves within your organizations. We are bringing our own perspective and experience, and we hope to demystify and make relevant this useful process for you and your teams. So I'll go over the background and concept of strategic planning. Sarah will share our Project ECHO experience through a case application. I'll then go over recommendations for implementation, as well as our resource share, and then we'll end with Q&A. So our learning objectives for today. So by the end of the session, we hope that we hope to have described the value of strategic planning for you, help you identify the type or scope of SP appropriate to your team, and give you tools to assess your team's readiness to embark on a strategic planning journey. I may also use SP and strategic planning interchangeably throughout, since there are a lot of syllables in strategic planning, so it might be a little bit faster to just use SP. So what is this thing that we call strategic planning? I hope to give you some background today and some common concepts to make it a little less intimidating for you. It's actually pretty simple. You figure out where you are, you figure out where you want to go, and then you design a plan on how to get there. And we often do this without realizing it. This might even be useful to any one of you individually in your careers. When you set your annual performance goals, you can think of it in terms of strategic planning for your career, where you want to go and how you want to get there. So your strategic planning should really be a living document that needs periodic review and updates. This process should include input from your team and all of your stakeholders. And this is especially important to ensure that you're focused on the right questions and the best areas for your program or your research. You should also align with your parent organization where possible. So I think all of us work within the Penn State or perhaps the College of Medicine overall organizational umbrella. Some of you may have heard that the College of Medicine is going through a 5-year strategic planning process right now. And the Penn State is in the middle of their, I think it's a 7-year SP process as well. So we do have some resources that we'll share with you about both the Penn State and the College of Medicine SP processes later on in the presentation. And it's also important to align your goals to your larger organization because it can show them, the parent organization, the value that your team brings to the institution. And there may even be funding opportunities through the larger organization that where your goals align and you can take advantage of to help you reach your own goals. And strategic planning can also be viewed as strategic doing. This is, I think, where a lot of SP processes fail. So you may have gone through this before, like I mentioned, and may have had some struggles or challenges. So unfortunately, the plan itself cannot do the work for you. You have to do that on your own. But you can dream big, and then if you don't do anything, it doesn't work. So you really have to incorporate the how you're going to get there into your plan and make sure it's a sustainable process for you and your team, or else it's just going to sit there and you won't achieve your goals. It may also include your mission and vision. So if your team or program doesn't already have these, it may be valuable for you to affirm your group's identity and help you guide your planning if you can kind of see where your vision of your future is. And also, strategic planning doesn't have to solely focus on adding new initiatives or programs. You can also think of it as removing programs that may not work or ineffective processes or decluttering. You want to get rid of what isn't working. So I'm a big Marie Kondo fan. So if you're familiar with her concept of decluttering, you can apply that approach as well. So Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, please. I also want to mention what's not strategic planning. So unfortunately, again, it's not a crystal ball that's going to predict the future, nor should it be. Things change in our internal and external environments all the time. So it's really unrealistic to have a really strict list of plans that can never be modified. You need to build in contingency or unknowns into your plans. It's also doesn't help, if it sits on a shelf, as I mentioned before, if you never look at it again, it's not going to get done. And then you'll be just frustrated that you didn't accomplish anything. And also, because you want to work with your team and your stakeholders in implementing a strategic plan, it's useful not to use buzzwords or jargon or technical terms that no one or not everyone understands. You really want to have a common language that you all understand when developing your plans. So even though I just said, don't use buzzwords, this next slide is actually full of buzzwords. So, again, these are maybe common terms that you may have heard before or may have used. So it's useful to describe what they are and you can use them, but I wouldn't get bogged down so much in the actual terminology is, you know what you're doing, just even if you use different terminology, it's still the same process. So a SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So strengths and weaknesses are internal team or program attributes, and it's useful to really look at where you are now and identify gaps or weaknesses and areas of strength, what your team brings to the table as far as implementing your plans. Opportunities and threats tend to be external attributes, and those can include funding. Perhaps there's another program at another institution who seems to get all the attention in your research space, and you think that we're a really great team doing good work, and so you want to bring more attention to the work that you're doing and want to show value in your research. And certainly COVID turned into a threat for many programs. A lot of folks had to stop what they were doing or lost funding, but it can also be an opportunity due to the large amount of research funding that had become available over the past few years. So you really want to do a survey of your team and identify what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. And then stakeholder mapping. So that will allow you to identify your stakeholders, which is really anyone who cares about, supports, performs, and or is impacted by the work that you're doing. This can include funders, patients, staff, leadership, and your team members. And then the next term is current state versus desired future state. So where are you and where you'd like to be, and how large the gap is between those two, between your current and your desired future state, will determine your plans and goals in most cases. Pain points. So is there anything that you deal with on a regular basis where you think to yourself, gosh, I wish this was better? That could be an inefficient process. That could be struggling to get funding. Do you need to build a team or improve team culture? Those are your pain points, and those are things that you want to focus on during your SP process. Key performance indicators, also known as KPIs, those are interim and final goalposts, so that helps you know when you've met your goals, helps you know that you're moving in the right direction. These are similar to SMART goals. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based or time-bound goals that you set up along the way. So again, that you know that you're going in the right direction. And then continuous process improvement, also known as CPI. This is part of the strategic doing. So as you transition from the planning stage to the implementation stage, this involves ongoing monitoring and improving goals and processes throughout the implementation of your plan. So if we can go to the next slide, the value of strategic planning for your team, and we really focus this on research teams, but it can include any kind of clinical or other teams within your department or your organization. So the primary value is that it gives committed, protected time to you and your team members to think about big questions and ideas. It also is valuable if you need to make a difficult decision, perhaps, again, that you're cutting a program or ending something, streamlining inefficient processes and planning for the future. And it's important to try to disconnect from your day-to-day work when you're engaging in this process, because it helps you kind of get out of that daily grind and help you take a step back and see the bigger picture. It can also build team cohesion and empower everyone's involvement. And as you go through the process, this was certainly the case for Project Echo, you may identify natural leaders or develop or uncover skills in your teammates that you didn't know were there. We have quite a few number of junior staff members who took such great initiative during our process and really grew into leaders. And I think that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't had this dedicated time to do this. It also allows you to gather, input from your team on a regular basis. And as I mentioned before, COVID really forced many teams to evaluate their operations. So it's useful to have periodic check-ins, even if you're not, engaged in dedicated time to do strategic planning. It's still useful to check in on a regular basis. And finally, it's actually really fun. I think it's really fun to think about the future and to dream big. So if nothing else, it's valuable just because it's kind of a great team building activity. So we'll go to the next slide. I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Sarah, to talk about our case.
Thanks, Abby. So I'm going to share today how the Project Echo team at the College of Medicine approached our strategic planning process, where the need for it came from, the process we used, and our outcomes and lessons learned. Project Echo is the extension for community health outcomes, and we provide training to clinicians and communities in rural and underserved areas. Our program started at Penn State at the end of 2013 with 3 full-time staff members. Over the first year and a half, our programs and funding grew gradually. Going into 2020, we had about 5 staff and a key federal grant awarded, and the team would hold team building retreats and conduct team building activities, but it wasn't strategic planning. There were a number of factors that precipitated our team embarking on a strategic planning process. In March 2020, COVID-19 transitioned our team, like many others, to a remote environment, but it also expanded the immediate need for our team's physician and community education programs and increased the number of grant opportunities we were seeing. So we entered a period of very rapid growth at this time. Just to give you an idea of what that growth looked like, over the course of about a year, by the beginning of 2021, we had 12 staff members. Programmatically, we had offered over 20 ECHO programs, and our funding had shifted from a bare bones budget to having multiple streams of state and federal funding. So in the midst of all of this growth and change in a virtual environment, we had to focus on how to move forward successfully and sustainably, also preferably with our sanity intact. And I think it's important to note also that during this time, the College of Medicine and Penn State University were going through their own strategic planning processes. So it was a good opportunity to align our growth and focus with those strategic plans. Looking at our team's strategic planning process, the first 6 months were really dedicated to planning and organization. The idea of strategic planning was introduced at an October 2020 team retreat. There was enthusiastic buy-in from the team, despite some apprehension. Almost everyone had been through some type of strategic planning before in their careers, with initiatives not really going very far. But we had great team dynamics and culture, and I think everyone really wanted to see a successful process because we had so many areas that we wanted to address. At that retreat, the team identified 4 of the eventual 5 key strategic areas, which became our strategic planning working groups. Leaders of each working group were selected, many volunteered, and over the next few weeks, staff joined strategic planning work groups based on their role, expertise, and affinity for the topic areas. Some cultural considerations that were important included establishing ground rules and having team empowerment. We had supportive, engaged leadership and the autonomy to create and implement ideas. Our PI and ECHO director was very supportive, which allowed for a completely peer-led process. We also knew we had a good balance of planners and implementers on our team, from previously completing the Strength Finders exercise. So we knew we had the staff structure in place to be successful. Over the next 3 months in early 2021, we entered the goal setting phase, where each work group established their own meeting schedule and set the goals and deliverables for their planning areas, which I'll share with you shortly. And then rounding out the planning and goal setting phase, in April 2021, our team reconvened virtually for 90 minutes. Each strategic planning group had 15 minutes to present their desired goals and deliverables and gathered feedback and buy-in from the larger team. And the framework and tools utilized by the strategic planning work groups included the current versus desired future state, as well as pain points, both of which Abby had reviewed earlier. And we also had a SWOT analysis that was conducted prior to this initiative. So the 5 key areas that the team decided to focus our strategic planning efforts around were projects and staffing, data and evaluation, outreach and customer service, policy, and funding and sustainability. And here are some examples of the goals and deliverables that each strategic planning work group developed. This is not a comprehensive list, but it does give you an idea of what each group worked on. A lot of the goals were based more around process and inputs rather than outputs. Our project and staffing group focused on a comprehensive staff onboarding process and standardizing and operationalizing our ECHO program processes to increase efficiency. The data and evaluation group looked at systematic program evaluation. The policy group took on advocacy and funding for ECHO at the state and federal level. Our outreach and customer service group focused on increasing awareness and expanding our network, stakeholders, and partners. And our funding and sustainability group took on processes and deliverables that streamlined our grants and proposal efforts and really made those more manageable. So once all the goals and deliverables were set, it was time to get to work. Our implementation phase took about a year to complete. In summer 2021, we began working on our deliverables. One of our biggest challenges was balancing our strategic planning work with our regular work in a very busy time of growth. So flexibility with timing really became key. Each work group delegated tasks and accountability in a way that worked best for those team members and set their own check-in schedules. Some groups met weekly or bi-weekly, and others met monthly. A few months later in September, we had a working team check-in where each group shared updates on their progress and shared deliverables that had been completed. And for the remaining deliverables, we identified overlap and opportunities for collaboration among the work groups. So we were able to condense our original 5 work groups down to 3 at that time. And crossing the finish line, we reconvened for the final time a few months after that in May 2022, which was about a year after we started implementation, when all deliverables had been completed. As a last step, we identified which goals and deliverables we wanted to evaluate going forward as part of continuous process improvements, and we assigned evaluation methods, metrics, and timelines for those which are ongoing. So looking ahead, we're currently in a maintenance phase and do not have plans to replicate the full process on an annual basis. Looking at the outcomes of our strategic planning process, there are the tangible outcomes, like having over 20 completed deliverables, operating more efficiently with improved streamlined processes, and having an expanded, engaged stakeholder group who are really great partners. But there's also the intangible, the team camaraderie, and also how the thinking we developed during strategic planning is now really woven into our team culture and the way that we work and approach new opportunities. And finally, some lessons we learned along the way that we are happy to share with you. First, make sure your scope and process are manageable. This should not be a stressful experience adding to workload. We had a larger team, but your strategic planning process could be one work group and just a few deliverables. There is value in all types of setups. Second, don't be afraid to let go of projects and processes. Sometimes strategy is removing unnecessary processes or systems rather than adding new ones on. Next, incorporate your evaluation metrics and continuous process improvement in your goal setting or early implementation phase. Think about what those metrics would look like and how you would define success. Pivot when necessary, even during your planning phase. It is okay to make changes throughout the process. We are all working in changing environments, and your strategic planning process can reflect this. And finally, ask for feedback. We received great ideas and recommendations when our work groups presented to the full team for feedback and buy-in. So utilize your team, your PI, and your stakeholders. Having a second set of eyes can make a great idea or plan exceptional. All right, I'm going to hand it back over to Abby, who's going to talk about where to start if your team is interested in strategic planning.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to, as Sarah mentioned, talk about scope of strategic planning and how you determine what's right for your team. So as you can see, we as ECHO undertook a very large scope of strategic planning for many reasons, but there isn't really a one-size-fits-all scope. And so you don't need to feel overwhelmed, if you're looking at this and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a 2-person team and this is way too much. You don't need to completely revolutionize everything that you're doing in order to engage in this type of process. So what we've done is identified 3 levels or scope of SP that you can choose which one's right for you and your team. So in the foundational scope or the foundational level of SP, you can focus on basics like startup processes, standard operating procedures, and short-term plans. This can also happen at the start of a new project. Perhaps you've gotten a sizable grant and you want to figure out how to strategize to implement that plan. And don't underestimate the importance of fundamentals. So this is always really important to do, even if you're a larger or established team. For the intermediate scope, so I would say that our ECHO team was engaged in intermediate to advanced because we were really in a growth stage and building our capacity. So in this phase, you're managing growth, you're building capacity in a thoughtful way. So for example, you may have recently received sustainable funding for several years, and you can use that as a launching point for your plans. And then in the advanced scope, it's really more for established or larger teams who kind of have the basics down, but they want to focus on things like staff development, culture, building your reputation within the institution, larger funding or looking for larger funding, and achieving your full potential. And so if we go to the next slide, we actually have a tool that might help you determine where you are and which kind of scope is appropriate for you. So many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I'm kind of a Maslow nerd fan. And so during COVID, I developed this when I saw that staff were struggling, especially the very beginning of the pandemic when we were all sent home. And I was kind of helping staff in our department navigate what is going on, how do I get what I need to do my job. So it was helpful for me to look at it from this perspective in helping staff members, but also helping leadership to understand how they could best support staff during this transition. And especially, when you're trying to balance work from home and work or home becomes your workplace, how do you manage that? So as I mentioned, this can be a tool for you to determine, kind of match up where you are in the hierarchy, and then use that to determine which strategic planning scope is right for you. If you're not familiar with Maslow, the general idea is that you need to satisfy the basic or the lower level needs before you can operate at higher levels. Every level is necessary and important, so I don't want you to think that just because you're at the basic or the safety or security that you're in bad shape or you're never going to get to the higher levels towards self-actualization. It's actually really important to meet those basic needs first. Again, there are basic, safety and security, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. And we will share this with you after the presentation so you can look at this in a little bit more detail. But COVID, may have knocked you down a few levels. Maybe you had to start working from home. Maybe you got new funding because of COVID, or you may have lost funding and had to really pivot what you and your team were able to accomplish and what you were frankly doing on a day-to-day basis. So basic level needs include, what are we doing? Do I know where to find the tools I need to do my job? How do I set up my Wi-Fi? How do I communicate with people now that everybody's on Zoom and using their cell phones instead of being in the office? Maybe you needed to focus on belonging needs to figure out the transition to working from home and maintaining communication and cohesion with your team while working in separate spaces. That was certainly the case for our ECHO team. And it's also critical to talk to everyone on your team when reviewing this hierarchy. I found that, especially if you're in a leadership position or you have a lot of experience or autonomy within your position, you may personally be at a higher level, but the rest of your team may be in the basic or the safety security level where you're unsure if you're going to have a job tomorrow. So you really need to understand where everyone is on the team and meet them where they are. And that's summarized in the key takeaway in that little orange bubble in the top left there. So just don't assume that everybody's on the same level that you're on. And now, as I know the pandemic's not really over, but we're changing some guidelines, and a lot of teams are moving back into the office on at least a part-time or a full-time basis. So you may need to use this to reassess where you are and perhaps can move. Maybe you need to start over completely, or perhaps you've established basic needs and can move on to higher level needs. So this is useful at any point during strategic planning or just, as a team building exercise. So Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, please. This is another tool that we found and have adapted for you to determine whether your team is ready for a strategic planning process. So we call it a readiness checklist. This is adapted from the resource that's mentioned at the bottom here of the slide. And again, we'll make that available to everybody after the presentation. Again, this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of process. So we've kind of broken it down into smaller or newer research teams. And then the next slide, we'll talk about larger or more established teams and programs. But you could be a small team that's very established or a large team that's brand new because you just got a large grant and you're hiring a lot of people. So these are kind of broad categories, but certainly can be adapted to fit your situation. And I am a project manager, so I tend to look at strategic planning like a project. Basically, to know whether you're ready is to determine whether you have the right time, the right people, the right resources, and the permission to do this process. So I would say as far as time is concerned, our team members averaged about 1 to 2 hours per week of focused work during the planning stage, and then it varies greatly during the implementation stage. So hopefully that's helpful for you to determine how much time you need to dedicate to this process. But for small or new research teams, you want to make sure that you have the commitment, support, and involvement of your PI, who's your boss, and the rest of your team. You want to make sure that you're committed to clarifying roles and expectations going into this. So again, if you need to set aside time every week to be able to do that, just make sure that everyone's aware that you have that protected time. You want to make sure that you have the right mix of individuals. So you want to have both thinkers and doers. And so, thinkers are the big picture folks. The doers often look at things of like, how do I actually implement this plan going forward? And both of those are really critical to be involved in your planning process. You want to be inclusive and have broad participation. So as I talked about the different stakeholder groups earlier, and as Sarah mentioned, the way that we develop this process with our team, you want to make sure that everyone feels ownership of the process and feels energized by it, instead of just like, this is one more thing I have to do and one more box I have to check off. And you have to have a willingness to look at things in new ways and new ways of doing things. So obviously, if you have some pain points, there's probably some sort of issue that you're working through. And so you don't necessarily have to, again, revolutionize or throw everything out and start from scratch. You can certainly improve upon existing processes, but it often helps to be able to look at it in a new or innovative way. And you also have to make sure that there's no serious conflict between key stakeholders. So if, for example, there's a fundamental difference in direction between perhaps your PI and your department chair, you may need to wait until that's resolved before you can launch into strategic planning. Because if your department chair has different ideas of where your team should be going and they need to figure that out, it doesn't really help if you're trying to make plans in the long term while that's going on. So it's useful to make sure everybody's on the same page as much as possible. And also, as I mentioned, make sure that you're able to allocate those resources to the process. And so if we go to the next slide, this is a readiness checklist for larger established programs. So once you've already met everything that's required for the small or new research teams, you can move on to larger or established teams readiness. So one of the main things is having no high impact decisions that are being made in the next 6 months by an external force. So if you're waiting to hear that you got a multi-million-dollar grant, wait until you know before you make any decisions, because obviously that is going to have a huge impact on what your goals are and where you need to focus your time going forward. You need to manage the parameters within which you're working. So whether that's your PI, your project manager, or other leadership within your group, making sure that you articulate what the constraints are or the non-negotiables. So if something is completely off the table that you think that you might want to do, you need to know that going forward so that you don't waste time trying to plan for something that's not going to happen. And also that that commitment to tying your SP process to the organization's annual planning and budgeting. So I mentioned earlier that the College of Medicine and Penn State have their own strategic plans, and also mentioned that there may be opportunities to tie your programs into what they're doing. You really do want to take advantage of that, because that can open up doors that perhaps you weren't thinking about, or open up opportunities to promote your team's goals within the larger organization and show that value add that you bring to the table. So that is pretty much everything that we have to share. Sarah, if you could go to the next slide. We have some really fantastic resources that we've used to design this presentation, as well as what we use during our strategic planning process. So that includes the readiness checklist, both the College of Medicine and Penn State strategic plans, and the Strength Finders book that all of us are a really big fan of, that we learned about our strengths as a team, and we're able to come together and use those strengths and build on each other's strengths to implement our process. So that is it for our presentation. We are happy to open it up to questions, and I guess I'll turn things back over to Erica to lead the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you both so much. That was an incredibly well done and thought out presentation. And as I was sort of jotting down my questions to ask you, you answered most of them. So you did a fantastic job explaining your process and providing some takeaways for the group. So I would love to open it up to any questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself or drop your question in chat.
Thank you, Dee. Thanks, Josh.
Okay, well, I do have one question. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with the team, when you introduced this idea, given so many competing priorities as you indicated, was there any pushback? Did everyone participate? Do you feel like in a larger team, participating in the process should be optional? Can you just talk a little bit about some of that kind of real world experience?
Sure. So I'll take that one. And Sarah, if you want to interject, please do. When we first introduced it to the team, I would say there were two reactions. It was largely positive, I will say that. So there was kind of a sense like, oh yes, this is really needed. So I hope I'm speaking for everyone on our ECHO team who's here. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There was a little bit of apprehension. And one of the things that I really wanted to make clear in this presentation is that, some folks, especially if you're in a leadership position, you may have engaged in this in other organizations or other teams. And so you have these big plans, and then you write it all down and everybody feels good and pats themselves in the back, and then it doesn't go anywhere. So we really wanted to make sure that we didn't fall into that trap here with our process. And so we really designed it from day one to make sure that we were actually including the implementation into the plan so that it wouldn't just, fall apart. But I would say overall, there was excitement. I actually had, just based on team roles, as Sarah described, had kind of drafted or recommended folks for the 5 different groups. And I think to date, everyone's relatively stayed within their groups. We have had some new team members who kind of joined where it was appropriate, but I definitely think it should be voluntary, or as you have capacity. But everybody was so excited and engaged and wanted to do it that we didn't have anybody who dropped out or said, no, I don't have time for this. But definitely, if it's forced, it's not gonna work if someone just doesn't want to participate.
Yeah, we had a lot of team members who are actually part of multiple groups. And I think that speaks to having the full team buy-in early in the process for what your key work groups are going to be. and having those aligned with the team interest and expertise.
Yeah, and I am seeing questions. So Dee's question about the best practice on initial size. So I would say it's best to have multiple perspectives. However, even if you are a lone project manager and you have a very busy PI who may not be available, it's always, you can start just jotting down ideas to start a process. So it doesn't have to be multiple folks. And I think but that would also kind of determine which scope that you could take on. It really needs to be something that you can handle within your existing responsibilities. So I hope that answers your question, but it can be one person or many people. And if it's a whole lot of people, like if you have a huge team and lots of stakeholders, it might be useful to kind of break things down into chunks. Like we did, we have 5 different, areas where the team could work on things that were of interest. Oh, thanks, Jessica.
Abby, one of the questions, is there a way to nudge short-term planning PI into being more open to the idea of strategic planning?
That's a fabulous question. So I will share, having not anyone on this call and not Jen Krasniewski is wonderful and she really empowered us, but I have worked with one of those folks before. I think 2 things there. One is making your case for the need. So obviously, if you think that there's value in it, there are probably really good reasons, really valid reasons. So you can identify pain points. And then the PI that I worked with was really solution focused. So it didn't, it's no good to complain about your pain points and then bring it up to them and say, here, you fix this. You really want to come with, these are the needs. The solution is for us to engage in this type of process. So, and one of the things that Sarah and I are perhaps hoping may come out of this is if there is a need or an interest, that we could have maybe a part 2 going forward or do more in-depth consultation where we could talk a little bit more about this, but definitely setting up the need from your perspective. As far as the pain points that you're seeing in your work and things that you want to improve. And you can even start to engage in this and come up with ideas to fix it. So, so that presenting that to your PI may allow you to get them on your side and showing them the impact of the short-term thinking and the potential benefit of long-term planning. May nudge them, I hope. And if not, if they're still not on board, you can still do that on your own. You can still kind of wrap your head around this and make plans for yourself that you can implement kind of within your scope of control. I hope that helps.
Yeah. So another question was whether the strategic planning initiative for ECHO was planned before or after the onset of COVID-19 and how it impacted our process. So COVID-19 was actually one of the catalysts for embarking on this journey. So I think in that regard, we would view it as impacting us positively in getting the strategic planning going, although there were some pain points in adjusting, and COVID was really what set our team off on rapid growth, just due to the nature of our work and our programming.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And we had to meet, we would have that first in-person meeting in October of 2020. We were outside at a park. So pro tip, do not have outside meetings at parks in cold weather because it is pretty miserable. So that would be my only, we had to be outside because of the social distancing, but try to do things on Zoom or in a warm environment if you can do that.
What about some of the ground rules that were set at that initial team retreat?
Yeah, that is really important. So I would say our team culture is like this. So I think we said it out loud, but we didn't have to really hammer it home or monitor it, but that everyone has input, that everyone's we were on, even though we have, technically we have managers and junior staff or whatnot, everyone could bring ideas to the table. And we really made sure that, especially at least in the ones, in the groups that I was participating in, but I'm sure it was that way for all 5 of our working groups, either making sure that everyone could speak or could share an idea, and then or actively asking if someone was quiet, do they have any ideas. I also think that that breaking down into smaller work groups facilitates that a little bit more because there are fewer people, so everyone's able to share. So some of the ones that I had mentioned, making things sustainable, don't take on more than you can accomplish, was a big one. Sometimes we're a really ambitious group, so that didn't always work. And sometimes we made some bigger goals and we had to kind of pull back a little bit. But I think those are the 2 main ones, making sure that you have the right team culture to facilitate this, and then making sure that it's something that you can actually implement, because that will encourage everybody on an ongoing basis. So it's not just, again, this thing that you have to, like, this burden on your team. It's something that you're actually excited to do.
Yeah, I would add to that too. Within the work groups, there are a lot of deliverables and everyone had an opportunity to lead something. So, I think that really helped keep people engaged and positive and moving forward. Everyone had some deliverable or some initiative that they were leading. And I think also keeping the interactions positive. We would start a lot of our meetings just celebrating your wins, just taking 2 or 3 minutes at the top and celebrating everything good that had happened since the last time you met. Even if your initiative had kind of taken 2 steps back or was paused, there's usually always something that happened to push it forward. So definitely taking the time to celebrate wins and acknowledging everyone's effort on the team.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I see, I believe it's Lena. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Share the tools for the reevaluation of study team goals, as well as the tools apps to coordinate meetings. So we used, I think, Zoom primarily, and then sometimes Teams. So we have a love-hate relationship with Teams. So I think we met mostly over Zoom at first, but we used, let me see, we used Word documents within, or I would say most of the, like, every group used something different perhaps, but we used Excel sheets to track all the goals overarching, and we still have that document or that spreadsheet, kind of what the goal was, what the deliverable was related to that, who was responsible for it, what the deadline was, and whether it was finished. And some of us, we would, for one of the groups that I was involved in, we had a current and future state graph, and just in a Word document. And so we would take our own notes and then bring them back. And then the person who led that group compiled them all and shared them with the team. I would say, oh, and the other thing, so we didn't use doodle polls. We use the calendar app because we can all see our calendars, one another's. So if your team doesn't do that already, that's really useful just to coordinate those meetings. So we would find, like, Tuesday at 2 worked for everybody. So that's how we would schedule those. I'm probably missing a dozen things, but we can certainly loop back around and share some of the tools that we used, or we could, maybe meet with you privately and discuss that.
Yeah. And for reevaluation, I think we approached, for continuous process improvements, which goals we're going to evaluate over time. We kind of approached it just like general program evaluation, really selecting, how long do we want to track this? Who do we need feedback from? What metrics would be helpful to gather? Is this something we could do qualitatively, asking a few questions, or do we need quantitative data? Does it require a survey? So we really just utilize a lot of program evaluation resources for that.
Great. I think we answered everybody's question in the chat. Did we miss anybody? Awesome. I'm also going to put, Sarah, can I put your email in the chat too?
Sure.
Okay, I'll put my email in, Sarah.
And Sarah, I think it's also worth mentioning some of the benefits that the ECHO team has seen through this process that aren't necessarily tied to process improvement. So specifically thinking about team culture, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the unintended benefits that you've seen throughout this process?
Yes, I think that goes back to really what the intangibles were. We saw a lot of team building and camaraderie. We all work on different phases of an ECHO project. So it really allowed us to get to know people on the team and work with people we may not typically work with. And I think just having it woven into our culture now, just the way we approach new opportunities, it's just kind of ingrained in how we work.
For sure. Yeah, and I had mentioned about, I'm sorry, Sarah, did I cut you off?
No, I was going to ask what you thought.
Okay. So I had mentioned that you may recognize that there are leaders on your team that you didn't realize, or people had skills that you didn't realize that they had. So we had, I won't put anybody on the spot. I don't think they're actually on this call, but we had one junior staff, but I was calling her junior staff, but she's well established now on our team, who had some incredible, she came, she had some research background and had worked in other healthcare spaces, and before she joined ECHO. And she had some incredible ideas as far as onboarding and training, and really, I mean, those are the process goals, but she, I hope that she felt empowered to bring those up and to really implement those and run with them. But that was such a fantastic realization to see folks that you wouldn't necessarily think, oh, there were newer staff member, maybe they're new to research, perhaps, what could they bring to this, and just had such fantastic ideas and were given the opportunity to implement them. And that further builds leadership and helps us support them in their skill development, professional development.
Yeah. And I think it added a layer of trust building, just seeing how engaged everyone was and discovering everyone's talents. I don't think anyone thinks twice about throwing a question out to the group and just getting everyone's feedback. So I think that was another positive outcome.
Okay, well, excellent questions, excellent conversation. Incredible presentation. Thank you both so much for your time today. I just wanted to close by saying, please do join us for the next Translational Science Seminar, the Science Policy Society at Penn State, Bridging Gaps Between Those Who Affect and Are Affected by Science. This will be held on Wednesday, November 9th from 12 to 1 p.m. And in this seminar, you'll hear from 2 graduate students at Penn State who will discuss some of the ways that their group facilitates conversations between scientific communities, policymakers, and then general public to encourage better science-driven policy and policy-driven science. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Have a great rest of your day.